The reason why we are in the middle of exams in JNU, so exam boards and everything and so on, but the two reasons why I decided to come and be a part of this, or three reasons. One is that when we were in the NCUS, there were two major unfinished sort of businesses we were not able to do. We had a mandate from the Ministry of Urban Poverty Alleviation to do a report on urbanization and social protection, and that we were not able to do. We wanted to do something on gender, although gender was mainstreamed into all our reports, but we also wanted to do a separate report on gender and social protection, and basically gender informal work, social protection, which is something we were not able to do because the Prime Minister didn't want to give us an added lease of life, so our term was not extended beyond the first UPA government. So that the urban agenda of the work remained unfinished, didn't really get done. And this is an area which has preoccupied me, although I've done very little work in relation to Ritu and Meena and most of you around the table on urban issues. But this is certainly an agenda which has also preoccupied me. So the second reason was that I would be able to learn from most of you who have been working in this area, and I would be able to do. The third is that the situation in Odisha, because ILO had asked me to do a mapping of social protection floor in Odisha. The ILO is trying to undertake studies which are somewhat state specific in a few states, including Odisha and Jharkhand. This is the initial stage where they're just trying to look at this map, the social protection initiatives, and look at a possible social protection flow from the perspective of the states. So I also had a vested interest in getting some feedback from particularly the our Odisha ActionAid people here on what is happening in Odisha. So what I'll do is, I'll get down to the conceptual issues, but let me first situate these three issues that have been given to me. I'll bring in I'll bring in the social protection aspect first, later on. But let me just talk about work, informal work, because that is something which all of you have been engaged with, and the question of urban areas, urbanization, urban processes. And this is something which I expect that most of you are much stronger in than I am. I don't know where to begin because these two are very interrelated. But let me begin by saying the following: that as far as informality is concerned, informal work is concerned, and if there is any issue, I'll get back to definitions, how informal work is defined, what do we mean by informal work, what is the distinction between informal sector and informal employment or informal work, and so on. But the Indian economy has always been in an ocean of informality, both in terms of the fact that the bulk of our production has always taken place in informal units, in informal sector units, and also the fact that the workers in the economy are mostly in informal work, informal employment. The two significant characteristics of informal work and informal employment are lack of job security, so the temporary nature of this work, and lack of social security, employer provided social security. Now, since the ILO's, the Statistical Commission of the ILO statistical groups defined what informal work was, and since the ILO sort of tried to bring out, particularly the Delhi group, as you know, was formed by the ILO to go into precise definitions of informal work and the informal sector. Worldwide, the two dimensions of informality: one, the dimension of job security, the other, the dimension of social security, has been operationalized by different countries in different ways. Okay, but these are the two dimensions of informality: social security and job security. So we have always been living with informality. At any one point of time, 90% or more of our workforce has been an informal workforce. It's not a phenomenon which has happened in recent decades. Yet there have been significant changes that have occurred in the recent decade in the world of work, and that is true both in India and also it is part of a global transformation of the work regime. So Meena was right in saying that the global can't be separated from the national or the local. And globally, the world has moved towards an increasing level of informality. In India, we have moved towards a transformation in the nature of informality. And the transformation in the nature of informality in India exists along with a change in the nature of, if you like, capitalist development that has taken place. In particular, that has taken place over the decades since liberalization. So since the 90s. So what are the changes that have taken place? The major changes that have taken place have to do with an increasing say of capital, increasing dominance of capital in the way capital has dictated where it wants to be, how it wants to be, and its relationship to capital. One of the manifestations of this is increasing concentration. Increasing concentration in spatial terms, increasing concentration in capital terms. Spatiality of concentration has an overlay with urbanism, but urbanism is not the only, in fact, it is related to urbanism, but it is not the only feature of spatiality and spatial concentration. So let me give a little bit of time to explaining what I am saying. What I am saying is that over the past 2.5 decades, economic agglomerations or agglomerations of economic activity have become very pronounced. These agglomerations of economic activity are in and around urban areas, in and around pre-existing areas of concentration of economic activity, but they radiate out from it. So there are patterns in which agglomeration of economic activities spill over from urban areas into surrounding areas, connect two or more urban areas, so they spread out radially between urban areas. So what we have is a characteristic pattern which has been described by some people as a hub and spokes pattern. So you have hubs of economic concentration of economic activity, and you have spokes like the cycle wheel. For example, if you look at Delhi, the hub around Delhi is not the Delhi urban area alone. It is the national capital region of Delhi. It is Noida, it is Gurgaon, it is Faridabad, it is Ghaziabad. But it is not restricted to Gurgaon, Noida, Faridabad, Ghaziabad. It spreads out from that into Manesar, beyond Manesar, into Rajasthan, beyond Rajasthan into the whole spoke which goes now from Delhi onto Ahmedabad, from Ahmedabad and Surat onto Bombay. So there is this radial spread of economic concentration. Now these spreads of economic concentration mean that there is enormous spatial inequality which is now emerging around these hubs and spokes. And this naturally is where there are enormous requirements of work, enormous requirements of labor, enormous needs for migrant labor, new types of activity which have come into existence. So basically the point that I am making is that you have now these enormous concentrations of economic activity which are or rather extruding from urban spaces. Okay. Now, so in other words, and I'll come back to basically the urban space in some sense needs to be looked at, needs to be redefined. Or we need, urban areas are now extruding into rural areas. But at the same time, rurality is now intruding into urban areas. Vis-a-vis swaths of migration, temporary migration, circular migration, seasonal migration. How do you define this? I mean, do you look at it in terms of urban periphery, urban peripheries? Do you define this as a rural phenomena, rural-urban villages? But the fact is that it's not just a rural-urban continuum. To define it as a rural-urban continuum would also not be correct. But spatiality has to be defined in a much in terms of the new contours of growth. Okay, that's the one thing which I would like to point out. Now, these contours of growth and the way capital is trying to define itself also means that core urban processes also in their relation to the urban periphery have been undergoing changes over the past 3 to 4 decades. The relationship of the social periphery, urban workers, the urban poor, to urban areas, to core urban areas, to the urban periphery, to the rural villages around the urban periphery have actually been changing over a period of time. I'll give you some examples because these are really examples because I think each of these requires, in my view, a lot of study. Okay. Till the 60s, industrialization, a lot of industrialization was actually embedded in urban areas. Okay. When you would readily recognize old Ahmedabad, old Ludhiana, old Kanpur, old Bombay, and so on and so forth. From the 70s, when capital started trying to restructure itself, you had a phenomena where the working class and the rural poor were increasingly getting expelled from urban areas. And then you also had a phenomena where the working class and the poor were also flowing into urban areas. Commuting became around certain urban areas. Commuting gradually began to become a more important phenomenon. But from the 90s onwards, because of just the sheer pressure on core urban areas, you had a phenomena where industrialization itself got pushed out of core urban areas. A much larger push. But already, of course, urban cities were getting located and so on. So you were at this process where industrialization, the urban middle class, and of course the urban poor were already part of the urban exodus, getting pushed out of the core urban areas into urban peripheries and in this hub and spokes pattern around. But of course this push is very specific because the urban poor got pushed into rural villages, they got, so rural villages got converted into new kinds of slums and so on and so forth. So this is a complex morphology which began to develop from the 90s. And this then led also to the creation of new towns, new types of industrial cities and so on. So the urban morphology itself has undergone enormous change from the 70s to the 90s to the 2000s. And there are many elements of this urban morphology. For example, there is only an extent to which the needs of capital coincide with the need to push out urban labor and urban poor. Because some parts of the urban poor and urban labor have actually got to coexist with urban capital. Because they provide services, and for those services to be provided cheaply, actually the urban poor it's important that the speciality, they coexist within the same speciality. So the expulsion of the urban poor doesn't go beyond a point. Even as urban space gets reconfigured, this doesn't go beyond a point, because beyond the point, the urban poor and the urban rich have to coexist for services to be provided cheaply, for various other things to be happened. So we go into a new phase of urban resettlement, slum resettlements, in situ development, and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying is that one has to understand this urban morphology in the context of what has been happening to capital more generally over the past 20 to 30 years. Now let me come to the world of work, which I have not described, because I think that's the third element of this which one needs to understand. In the world of work, there has been a huge situational change. Till the 60s, again 60s in some sense watershed, you see the capital in India, the main imperative of capital in India was actually to develop a stable working class. So the main concern was, how do you give stability to the working class? How do you create a stable class of the proletariat? And of course this began very early on. From the 19th century, if you read writings in colonial India, the major preoccupation of the colonialist capitalists, whether it was in the plantations, whether it was in the jute industry, whether it was in the textile industry, was how do you create a stable working class? A stable working class which kept on going back to rural roots. It didn't require industrial characteristics. So therefore you had to create industrial townships. The industrial townships which came up in India in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, Jamshedpur, then Ludhiana, Kanpur, Bhilai, Bokaro, and so on and so forth, where you had to provide facilities to the working class, housing to the working class, even within where industrialization was embedded in urban areas like Ahmedabad, Bombay, and so on. You had to provide, basically you had to address the issue of the social reproduction of the working class in a broader sense. The capitalists had to do it if they wanted a working class with stable industrial characteristics. And but this gradually began to change with the processes of, as I said, that these processes began to change in the 70s and 80s. But with globalization's imperative was to produce a destabilized and flexible working class. A working class which actually did not have roots. And this imperative came from two things. One, the need for flexibility. You had to have a working class was flexible in all the dimensions that labor economists talk about, in terms of time, in terms of location, in terms of functionality, and so on and so forth. And secondly, the disengagement of the industrialists and the capitalists from meeting or addressing the needs of what is called social reproduction of the working class. In other words, working class had to be addressed only in terms of the immediate wage requirement and disengage from capitalists trying to address the wider needs, the broader needs of social reproduction. Questions of housing, questions of living conditions, questions of household subsistence. And then this suited the thing so that, so the idea that you had actually a rural proletariat engaging with the processes of industrialization suits the new capital, because the burden of social reproduction then is thrown back to the rural areas. And capitalists only can feel responsible for meeting a very small cost of the social reproduction of labor, as long as labor is productive. Productive means when it comes into the workforce till the time that it goes out of the workforce. Capitalists are responsible only for labor during this particular span, are only responsible for meeting the wage needs of the working class in this particular span. They are not responsible for meeting. So in other words, the whole question of life cycle is broken up into the productive sphere, and the productive sphere is also then broken up into a number of subparts in order to flexibilize the so what meets this requirement is a mass of workers who circulate between town and country, between rural areas and urban areas. What meets this requirement are workers who are engaged for actually increasingly short periods of time. What meets this requirement is workers who by and large are not even engaged directly with capitalists, with employers. So there is let's say going back to history where recruitment of workers more and more increasingly takes place through contractors and intermediaries. So that capitalists are disengaged from the working class, completely disengaged from the working class. Okay. And from their working conditions. Forget about their living conditions, even from their working conditions, the wages that they are paid and so on and so on. Now it is, although what I am describing by and large is a working class which is directly, indirectly in the realm of paid work, but lot of what I am saying also actually spills over into domains of self-employment. For two reasons. One, a lot of self-employment has to do with provision of services to the urban middle class, to the capitalist class, and so on and so forth. So the nature in which their services are engaged is in some sense very much like what you find. So look at domestic services, for example. So it's very much of the same plane and acquiring more and more the same plane. Hiring through intermediary, short-term, part-time, flexible employment, and so on and so forth to suit the needs of the employers around them. Urbanism, to my mind, that's why it becomes a little more complicated. The urban morphology becomes a little more complicated because it has to deal with this enormous degree of fluidity, this enormous degree of temporariness of the working class. And the reason why I think it's very important to actually talk about it is because even for those who often work in urban spheres are engaged in working with this or that segment of the urban working class, and very often they miss out on this larger reality of fluidity, this larger reality of mobility, this larger reality of the rural-urban interface which is moving both ways, from urban to rural and rural to urban, and which is interacting with each other. Okay, so I, in my view, when one looks at this whole issue of both urban social protection, so notion of social protection, or when one looks at it from the point of the working class, you have to have some sense of what is the essential capitalist dynamics which is driving both urbanization and driving features of the working class. So this is where I really want to pitch this whole thing. Now, questions of social protection and so on are something, of course, which have come to us, which are part of the, let's say, an international, increasingly, body of international practice, which has come from notions of rights, social security, etc., which I think is important for us to be able to locate our work in. So I don't think it's unimportant, but I think the what I have just talked about is not something naturally the international terminology seeks to address. So that is where it has to be really situated. So this is, I just wanted to address the one part of what Rohan asked me to do. Talk about the transformation in the whole question of the work, but also try to locate it in urban processes, in, let us say, new urbanisms, because you cannot, in my view, talk about this without understanding the interconnections of between the way the urban is now including into the rural, the way the rural is including into the urban, and how the whole morphology of the working class has actually changed over the last 2 to 3 decades. So what is happening is that 30 years also ago, we were in a sea of informality. 30 years on, we are also in a sea of informality. That has not changed. What has changed is that today, capital is actually far more organized, far more concentrated than it was 30 years ago. So what we miss is today, what we talk about this informality, level of informality, 92%, 93%, what we miss out is that capital today is far more organized. What we miss out today, is that actually organized capital is far more, a much bigger part of economic activity in India today than it was 30 years ago. And if you like, in the more conventional terminology, the organized sector is actually much larger in India today than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Okay. So where does the organized sector get invisibilized? It's not only the migrant worker which gets invisibilized, actually the organized sector also gets invisibilized. Okay, because if you look at construction, look at the construction sector. You have these huge entities in the construction sector. Who do they deal with? They deal with the most informal segments of labor. Okay, and we never think of these big monoliths in construction as being a part of the large organized sector. 50 million workers, today in the last count, 50 million workers in the construction industry. Okay, and these 50 million workers, which probably is an underestimate, the bulk of them working in and around areas of urban agglomerations and engaged by real estate monoliths, large construction companies, but in forms which are totally disorganized, totally informal. Okay. So the presence of the organized sector is actually much, much larger than it was 30 years ago. And what has happened is that earlier informality was associated with the informal sector, small forms of production, petty forms of production. Now informality is associated with global labor processes, with concentrated forms of capital. And it's like, hollowing out, if you 70% of workers in the last count, NSS 2011-12, 70% of workers organized by, employed by the organized sector in this country are informal. And then if you take out the organized services, the public services, where the share of the informal sector is also growing. In government also it is more than 30% today. Okay, if you take that out, then the share of the informal workers in the formal sector of the economy is close to 80-85%. So those are the kind of realities. But this also is only a statistical artifact. Why is it a statistical artifact? Because we talk about the dimensions of informality being job security and social security. But if workers don't have the means to protect job security, then that job security is only on paper. And what has happened is that how do they protect? They have to be able to, supposing they are kicked out of work, they should have the wherewithal to approach a labor court, They should have the approach, the wherewithal to approach a union which can take something on their demand. But what is happening is there is the rapid de-unionization that has occurred. In fact, virtually if you look at new industry, the industry that is coming to existence post 90s, hardly any segment of the industry has a union. So the lack of any voice, any collective voice, and the fact that the processes of grievance redressal, labor courts, the labor machinery is so long drawn out, so this thing means that workers in all these industries are actually de facto informal. Because if indeed they work for an employer for 5 years or more, as a matter of fact, they cannot defend the nature of their formality. They cannot resist if factories close down, retrench, regroup, employ them as recontract, which is happening all the time. Workers cannot resist. Workers can't fight back. So the de facto informality, if anything, is much more than, in fact, even the de jure formality present by in terms of work and so on. Now, in this context, the point is that we have to raise a voice for these workers. And we have to raise a voice also the full question of work and social protection. The point that I am trying to make is that what has happened is that in the world of work, capitalists and the state are now only engaged at the most with the productive sphere of a worker's life. Anything before that or after that is not their concern. Anything which is part of that, in other words, their families, their household, their wives, is not the workers' concern. So it's like we say in Hindi, aam chusa gutli phek di. So workers come into the productive sphere of their life, they start working at very young ages now, 17, 18 in construction, domestic work, etc., etc., etc. And work of extraordinary physical intensity. Working hours in most sectors of the economy are 12 to 15 hours of work. By the time, and this is a question I keep asking myself, maybe some of you have answered. How many workers do you see in manual work beyond the age of 45 or 50? How many workers do you see? You will see some workers in the skilled category, virtually hardly any workers in the manual unskilled category. Effectively, these workers retire by the time they are 45 or 50. And because they cannot live in urban areas for all kinds of reasons, they go back to the rural areas. So they retire, and they're not on pensions. They have no recourse to any of these things. The only period of their life which gets covered by wages and directly is between 18 and 40, 50 years. And hence, of course, the need to talk about wider kinds of social security, to kinds of wider vulnerability, social protection is much more important today than it was ever the case because of this complete disarticulation of capitalist hiring strategies from the social reproduction. Okay, so this is basically where I think the two connect up. The question, the world of work, where of course there has to be a fight for decent work, etc., etc. I'll come a little more to that. To this whole question of how do you, of social protection, social security, etc.